Hey everyone, and welcome back to session 2 of Counseling Corner. Last time we talked about crisis and crisis management, and today we are going to talk about grief and loss. Yeah. Pastor Kenny, you have a lot to talk about when it comes to grief and loss.
Yeah, unfortunately, all of us at some time in our lives will lose a loved one. Sometimes it's not a loved one, it's a loss of a job. And so we begin to experience these emotions, and there's one word that describes all of the emotions that we feel, and it's called grief.
It's interesting because I think right now, as we're going through this season that we're all going through, I was just having a conversation with a licensed marriage family therapist, and she said that every person is going through some type of grief right now. And we are all in one of the stages of grief. And once we're able to recognize that, it almost gives us a little bit of peace, because we may not understand the feeling that we're feeling, but if we can say, I'm going through grief, then we can combat those feelings that we are feeling.
Absolutely.
So what does a grief journey look like?
Wow, it's filled with just a roller coaster of emotions. Actually, that's a good question. I don't know if you guys can see this, Sanaz. Grief just looks like this tangled ball of emotions. And so some people will experience denial. If it's referring to a loved one, a very close relationship, sometimes we just go into that denial stage and phase of not accepting the fact that we've lost someone. Sometimes it's anger, sometimes it's guilt, regret. This guilt and regret sometimes make grief complicated because maybe, we feel like we didn't, reach out to our loved one. We didn't go over and see mom as often as we could have. We didn't resolve this problem. We had an argument. She was sick, and so forth and so on. So grief is just really a ball of emotions. But, as a pastor, I often sit down with families and individuals, and they don't realize that grief is a journey. We always want it to just be a destination where, after a few days, after a few months, it's over. But it really is a journey. And sometimes starting out, the journey can be a little bumpy emotionally.
So what do we need to learn about the process of grief? What are some goals today that we want to be able to portray when it comes to this process of grief?
Well, I think it's important because, your emotions are going haywire, and oftentimes people will think that they're going crazy. And so they'll say, Pastor Kenny, it just feels like everything is falling apart, and especially for a believer. And it's so unfortunate for us, because sometimes we feel like, when we're falling apart emotionally, we feel like we're not walking in faith. We feel like we're not trusting God. But it's so important for me to acknowledge with them that the emotions that they're feeling is very natural. It's normal for the process of grief. And so grief sometimes can look like a disaster. When someone's, maybe have experienced a disaster in their life, I think of Katrina. I can just imagine, as the water began to rise, and then people were up on their houses. Some people had just got jobs and, probably saw their job floating down the street. And so they were just wondering what was going to happen to their life, just so much uncertainty.
I think it's just so important to recognize too that there could be days where we are absolutely okay. And we think we're getting through the process. And then all of a sudden, one day you wake up and you're just absolutely a wreck. And you say to yourself, gosh, I thought that I had passed the grief part of this disaster, this loss that happened in my life. Why do I feel this way today? How would you say to somebody who is feeling that type of way? They thought that they had gotten through the grief process and woke up one morning and just was feeling almost like their loss happened yesterday.
Yeah, because oftentimes people feel like, it's almost like a light, a light switch. We want to go cut the light on, and we want to go cut the light off. And so oftentimes people want to do that with grief. And so often, occasionally, they'll start feeling fine. They'll start interacting with family members and friends, and then all of a sudden they'll wake up. Maybe they're in the store, and so they'll see someone that maybe resembles their loved one, or they go get a scoop of ice cream, or they smell something, and then the glistening starts to come. And then they start resisting, and they're saying, I wonder what's wrong. And so understanding is so important in helping people when they're grieving to understand that it is a process, it is a journey. There will be times when there will be good days, and unfortunately there will be some bad days, but they don't last forever.
Now that we have an understanding of what grief looks like in our life, what are the next steps and for us to be able to get through the grieving process?
Well, I think of stages of comfort. And so I think I encourage people to be around close family and friends. When people grieve, they tend to isolate themselves. It's just a natural response to grief. And so we want to isolate ourselves. We don't want to see nobody. We don't want nobody seeing us crying, and we don't want to make nobody else cry. So we tend to isolate ourselves. So I really encourage people to be around close family and friends.
I think that's really important. And I think right now, especially now that we've identified that the coronavirus is causing us to be in a stage of grief, and we're forced to be isolated, that we really have to go above and beyond and say, you know what, I'm not okay today. Let me make a phone call. I'm not okay today. Let me reach out to somebody who can give me a word of encouragement. Let me call a pastor in my life. Let me encourage somebody else. Do something that actually connects us to somebody else in that time, because the isolation, the being alone does not benefit our grieving process. Maybe that's something that we've always felt like, I just want to be alone and I don't want to bother anybody and I don't want anybody to feel sorry for me. And that can really feed into our grief and
Absolutely.
not help us better. So I think it is important, like you said, to really, once we understand it, to reach out and be comforted and really call on our support system.
Absolutely. Comfort also can come from just either yourself acknowledging, or maybe a family or a close friend that will acknowledge your emotions. These emotions are real. Feeling sad, feeling angry, feeling confused, feeling abandoned.
Yeah.
Some people feel abandoned. Some people are angry. This might sound a little strange, but some people feel angry at their loved ones. Why did you leave me? And so then they feel guilty about feeling angry. And so as a pastoral counselor, it's my job to let them know that these emotions are normal. It's, grief, someone said grief is the price that we pay for loving someone. And so we grieve because we love.
I'll take it. Honestly, I'll take it. To experience love, if we have to experience the grief of the loss, I'll take it. Do you have anything else to say, Pastor Kenny?
I think it's important. So we talk about understanding, we talk about comfort, and then I think we also need to talk about support. What does support look like? So once again, I'm going to lean on my family and friends, but then I'm also going to lean on some individuals, those family and friends who are mature, who are willing to support me, who are willing to go on the roller coaster ride with me, as it were. I also encourage a good grief share class. Just so that you understand that the whole process of grief and in a grief care class is to help to normalize your emotions so that you say, okay, I'm not crazy. This feeling is normal in relation to grief, in relation to loss.
I think that the grief group is one of the most positive experiences that you can have while you're going through it. And I think a mistake that a lot of people make is saying, I can handle this on my own. I don't need help. Don't pity me because I'm going through something. I don't want to look like I can't handle this, so I'm not going to go and get the support, because it takes a lot of strength and courage and bravery to actually ask for that assistance.
Absolutely.
So it's one of the bravest things that you can do, asking for help during this time.
I think it's important because oftentimes when we grieve, we think that we're grieving alone. And so in a group, sometimes people resist the group because they say, I don't want to cry in front of strangers. And so I really encourage them, and sometimes it takes them a few weeks to engage, but then as they see other people experiencing some of the same emotions that they are feeling, then we encourage them that this is a safe place. So this is a safe place to cry. It's a safe place to be mad. I'm a pastor. It's even a safe place to be mad at God.
Thank you for joining us today. I hope that it gave you a little bit of peace about the grieving process. Join us next time as we talk about winning over worry.
Worry.
Take care.
Bye-bye.